Good morning. My name is Shannon. I'm here with Melanie Bennett, my co-host of the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. Today is the second of September. Today, it's hard to believe. There's 18 more days to the big day, September 20th. We're going to talk about that in today's weekly Gender Wars Report. But there is some, of course, really big news. Last week we said more has happened in the last week than has happened, kind of in the whole year. And then bang, on Monday we had two huge stories. We had the Ipsos Reid Poll. That's a major Canadian polling organization, come out with a public opinion survey. They surveyed over 3,000 Canadians about keeping secrets in school. And the overwhelming majority of people surveyed said that 78% said keeping secrets is not a good thing between teachers or schools and parents. And only 14% across the country supported the idea of keeping social transition of gender secret at school. So lots of brewing controversy. Then by the middle of week, we had Egale Canada. Egale is a LGBTQ alphabet organization. They're heavily funded by the federal government. They started threatening Premiere Moe and the education minister in Saskatchewan for eliminating the secret keeping policies. And gave a deadline, and the deadline passed. And so there's a lawsuit now filed by Egale Canada, funded by the federal government, against Saskatchewan Premier and Education Minister. And then, of course, we're going to chat about September 20th. But I wanted to start today for a couple reasons with a city councillor in Richmond, BC. Now, Richmond is just south of Vancouver proper. It's actually the place where I grew up. And I reached out to Alexa Liu, city councillor, because I saw her getting stormed online for making comments about secret keeping and grooming on her Twitter. And I direct messaged her and I said, look, I'm glad you're saying what you're saying. You're very accurate about this grooming and how this grooming works. And if you're in trouble, let me see if I can bring some support to you. Just let me know. So she reached back and she said, thanks for the support. I said, well, I'm a Richmond boy, and it turns out we went to high school together. I don't remember her. She went on to become an Olympic athlete. She's got kids.
Canada's such a small place. I always find that funny. You can do that. That never happens in the UK. It would be very unlikely.
Anyhow, she has kids in sports and in other activities, and she's a city councillor. And I'm going to read to you a couple of the things that she said, because she was taking a lot of heat. And here... what's the latest? Okay, so Alexa Liu said, cults and groomers use alienation and love bombing and other tactics to separate their targets from the target's family, posted Liu. Schools should not be teaching kids not to trust their parents. How is my 5, 6, 7-year-old supposed to make a distinction between acceptable secrets with teachers and unacceptable secrets with other people, with potential predators? I'm putting a couple words in her mouth. She said, when asked about her reference to cults and groomers and the historical use of such terms to vilify LGBTQIA community, Liu said, lots of terms have been used against them. They don't own those terms. I'm not talking about them. She seems to be weathering the storm quite well.
Well, that's interesting, because that's what we both were discussing yesterday, and seems to be something that I feel needs to be brought up over and over and over again, because there's a manipulation of... So I feel like with the media and with this narrative, there's either a gross misunderstanding, a gross ignorance of the actual issues with, or the actual pushback against queer ideology, which is what this really is: queer theory, queer principles, all these things, and the actual issues. So nothing to do with homophobia. Yeah. So it's either a gross misunderstanding of the actual issues, which is a problem if you're a journalist, if you don't understand the issue, or it is a deliberate manipulation of the issue to try to manipulate and influence the public to get on board with a political message. And both of those things are really a problem if we're talking about journalism, if we're talking about the kind of messaging that's going out across the country. And that raises a lot of questions about the validity of our media. So it's nice to see people coming out and starting to understand the underlying issues here. And the underlying issues here that I would like to raise, and I think you've raised quite a lot as well, is that it is opening the door to many issues around the protection of children, right? And it's not saying that all the people that wish to push queer ideology, it doesn't mean that all of them are predators. It does not mean that all of them are groomers, but it does open the door and make it easier for those who have those negative intent to act on their intent. We know that predators will go where their prey is. Mm-hmm. And if you have, in a school, for example, if you even go look on the SOGI task force website, you'll see numerous amounts of teacher misconduct. So this is, we've known for a long time that schools attract, and education attracts predators for the reasons that they wish to be around their prey, the children. And if you have entire school boards and schools preparing those children, lowering their boundaries, and getting them used to the tactics, i.e. the grooming, you may not know that you're grooming, but the grooming, that makes it infinitely easier for those who do have nefarious intentions. And so I'm really pleased to hear people coming out publicly and speaking about these things. Yeah, well done.
Yeah, I spoke with her briefly. I DM'd her again following that Richmond News article. And I said, terrific response in the article. You handle it very, very well. And I said, the language that you're using suggests to me, like that language comes with a price. Like you or somebody has to have been through something like this in most cases for you to understand how this works. And so thank you for your bravery and your willingness to stand up with this. And she said, well, my career in sports and my children in sports, we've had all kinds of issues in the sporting world in Canada. And so we're aware and we're prepared for these kinds of things. So let me go now to Stephen Lecce. Following the release of the Ipsos Reid poll on Monday, or maybe right before, like it was within an hour of the release of the poll numbers, Stephen Lecce, Education Minister of Ontario, said that he was going to have they were going to put a policy in place, or their policy was that schools shouldn't keep secrets from parents. Now, that's not a binding statement. There's no legislation that goes along with it. But nevertheless, he did make that statement. And now we talked before the recording started. And just to reiterate, maybe I haven't said it, but that Ipsos Reid poll, almost 80% of Canadians don't want secrets between parents and schools on this issue. So Lecce has, they all know now they have a good solid support in public opinion, where the vocal minority before really made it frightening and to speak about it. And now we have a widely distributed pushback that makes it much harder for the radical activists to attack a single person, which is partly how I think that Alexa Liu is getting through this without being bombed by all the trans activists in Canada. They're just spread too thin right now.
Yeah. On that topic, I'm going to segue slightly because of this announcement or public expression from Stephen Lecce. There's been a lot on that. But one thing that I wanted to tie into that with the marches in September is that my organization, Our Duty Canada, has prepared a resource for parents based on the communications from Lecce. And I'm going to read a little bit of it. It's a letter that any parent can go access on our website, and they can hand into their schools this coming September. So let me just read a little bit to give you a flavor of the type of resource that you can use. So if you keep your children home from school on September 20th, and you don't want to just say, my child's sick, but you want to address the issue in a very soft, easy manner that is non-confrontational, you can use this letter. So let me read it a little bit. I'm getting old. All right. In line with recent with the recent statement made by Ontario Minister of Education Stephen Lecce, I'm writing to request that the school board review its policies on parental involvement and consent, particularly regarding gender identity for students. We ask that the school board's gender identity policies and procedures be revised to include parental consent for the use of preferred pronouns, alternate names, alternate sexed bathrooms, and alternate sexed sports and extracurricular participations for students. Now, the letter goes on in quite a lot more detail than that, but it expresses why people are deciding to speak out against this. And one of the very important notes that I want to make, just a side note for myself, is that this letter does not refer to gender when we're talking about sex. So often I think one of the successes with queer ideology is that it confuses gender and sex in our mind when we are almost always talking about sex. Gender is just culture. I prefer to call it culture when we're talking about gendered roles. We're talking about cultural things. We're not, in my mind, gender, I think we need to get rid of that term altogether because it causes too many problems. So this letter really talks about the issues around sex. So that's something that people can go access if they want to join in the march in September. And it encourages Stephen Lecce to take what he's saying maybe a little bit further, and that there are parents who very much support this, and we're announcing that to schools. So that should be on the website soon. I'll put a link.
Terrific. There's a huge number of resources coming together around the 20th of September and larger efforts. And the secret keeping, like Alexa Liu talked about, doesn't just, it's like it's all part and parcel of this. We're using the terms queer theory, queer identity, ideology, or trans activism. The secrets began with the efforts to smuggle this into schools and public education and circumvent the sex ed curriculum. So a lot of people think, oh, well, what's the problem? The curriculum is posted. That's what's taught. That's actually not true. The SOGI curriculum and the gender identity and inclusion doctrine is smuggled in, like it's secreted into the education system.
Yeah, let me underline that a little bit. I've been communicating with teachers to understand, because we often hear, this isn't in the curriculum. Go read the curriculum. And I was confused by this because I know that it's being disseminated. In fact, Action Canada for Sexual Health, whatever they are, the legal body that disseminates the UN policies, tell you there that they want to measure it being taught in school. So I was very confused by this. And it turns out that it isn't in the curriculum. It isn't in the curriculum. It's in the policies. And they are required to, and that's why all the different schools have their own culture around this. So some will teach it more than others because it's not in the curriculum, it's in the policies. And so it's a way of sneakily putting it in. And the most woke of principals, the most woke of school boards will really push this in the PD days. So it's done in sort of a backdoor kind of way. But have no doubt, this is a very important thing in the country because it is being measured and tracked for to make sure that it's being disseminated. That's something that I will talk about maybe another time a little bit. I've been looking into that a bit more, but it's not in the curriculum. It's in policies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've tracked that as well, and I think it would be a great conversation to get into depth about it. People ask for proof all the time of this, and because they can't quite wrap their heads around that this is what we're being lied to, and that the education system is lying to the public about this, and that they use this, well, it's not in the curriculum, as a way of hiding, of gaslighting.
Look over there.
Of gaslighting.
Yeah.
So an Ottawa mom, Pamela Buffoni, her daughter was in grade 1. This was 6 or 7 years ago when these policies first came in, and a new teacher, grade 1, was teaching the children that there's no such thing as boys and girls and that you can change their sex. And she put up a spectrum of Barbie on one hand and G.I. Joe on the other, and said you can be anywhere in between, and you get to choose your sex. And this was distressing for Buffoni's daughter, and so she complained to the teacher, and the teacher said, "Well, no, that's reality, right? Gender's a spectrum." And then she went to the principal, and the principal defended the practice, and then she went to the trustee, and the trustee defended the practice, and then she took it to the Ontario Human Rights Commission. The Human Rights Commission couldn't measure harm. So that was what they were looking for, a measurable harm. So reported.
But they can measure gender.
Yeah.
Spectrum.
So they didn't find in Buffoni's favor in this case, but they did establish the fact pattern that teachers, principals, school boards are all defending this policy and saying it's appropriate to
Yeah.
teach. So we're talking about sex and
Yeah.
sexual identity with kids in grade 1, even in kindergarten, in the public education system. And there's no way to say that they're not teaching gender ideology in schools when everybody has to be addressed by their appropriate pronouns. As soon as you,
Yeah, that's another thing that's in policies, high up policies, UN policies, then taken up by the organizations in Canada that are leading on disseminating that. It's all there. I mean, it tells you from year 5 onwards to discuss gender identity and to, again, we'll go into that another time. But I don't know with the schools whether or not I think I'm starting to think a lot of teachers don't understand what they're doing. But I hope that this year, with some of the things that are happening with the policies with Manitoba, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and now possibly Ontario, that they'll start thinking about it differently. Like you said, lady in Richmond who hasn't had this happen to her family, but is starting to understand the nuances that are really the
yeah.
issue here.
Well, it's a huge topic. I've been following this in media. That's what Weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report has been about so far this year. And we have another voice in media on this issue that's emerging, and that's with the Toronto Sun. His name is Brian Lilly. And Brian Lilly's been reporting semi-regularly on this issue. He had an interview with Jordan Peterson last week about the issue. So another significant news outlet in Canada is talking about this. But we're also going to get a lot of reporting on the legal conflicts. So an organization called Egale, which stands for Equality for Gays and Lesbians Everywhere, heavily funded by the government, it has threatened and then launched a lawsuit against Premiere Moe in Saskatchewan. And they gave a deadline. It was sort of like they drew their line in the sand. Like, if you don't change your ways, we're going to sue you. And so they've started this whole process. You've done a little bit of looking into Egale, and
Yeah.
while they seem to get good,
What an interesting
yeah, well,
organization.
it's like
Let me read
in
something.
Bond villain language for sure.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I had a little look into the complaint, and I'll just read something because I find that there is an overarching narrative in this complaint that I'd like to start reading. The policy does not appear to have the result or have been the result of any meaningful consultation or grounded in any good quality evidence about the best interests of students. If it is implemented at the imminent start of the school year, the policy will cause devastating and irreparable harm to gender-diverse students under 16 years who do not feel safe coming out at home. These students will face an impossible choice: to be outed to their parents under the policy or remain closeted at school. Now, there's a little bit more language in there, but what I wanted to underline here is the sense of danger. There's in everything that
Oh,
I've read about this, there's danger coming. It's dangerous. This is danger, and there are other things that I've noted. Actually, let's talk about this. I'll talk about some other things I've read after. Yeah, the overarching narrative of the danger.
mm-hmm. Well, Egale has a couple of months ago they came up with this thing called "Don't Let Them Unravel Our Pride," which is a big report that they did. And they claimed 6,423 missing threads. It sounds like people are dying, right? It
Dead
sounds like
people.
people are dying, each one representing an attack on our community. Another hate-fueled protest, another bigoted post, another threat against our right to exist. Now, they compiled a report and they sampled examples of these so-called missing threads, and they're mean tweets. They
Yes, mean
are
tweets.
okay. I recognize that there are people who are driving their trucks over rainbow flags in small town Canada, um, and maybe
But there's no distinction between basically a tweet that you disagree with, like saying, I don't believe gender is
right,
real. Like that would be considered me taking away your right to
yeah,
exist. I'm not talking about your right to exist. I'm talking about conceptual ideas. So that would be the same thing as someone beating someone up whilst telling them, I hate gay people.
right,
They would be the same
yeah.
thing. And they're both about genociding.
The real numbers, okay, so they also reported Marcy Len, I think she's a minister of gender and women's equity for the Liberals. She spoke this week claiming that there's a 64% increase in hate crimes against the rainbow people in Canada.
What's a hate crime?
Right?
Yeah.
And then when you look at the numbers, okay, we've already got in our head, they've got this big report, 6,400. And that's just until May of 2023 from the beginning of the year. So when you look at the
Yeah.
numbers, I went to Stats Canada and I looked at the crime statistics, and the comparison years are 2020 to 2021. And on the page that enumerates these, they're talking about anti-black racism, hate motivated crimes, anti-Semitic hate motivated crimes, and anti-Asian hate motivated crimes, and then as well the LGBTQ plus group. The
Yeah.
numbers are really interesting because I'm a stats guy. I like numbers, and I like to disambiguate these things. So the numbers are in 2020 for this cohort of people, there were about 265 reported hate crimes. Reported, not charged. The number of charges are only about in about 20% of the cases.
What is it? So we're talking about hate crimes and hate speech and this sort of thing. I have yet, and I do try to read these things, I do try to understand where this is coming from. I have yet to understand what hate is. I mean, we all talk about it. We assume the worst of what that means. But when you discover that me saying, I don't think gender exists, would be considered
Right.
hate, it does beg the question: where's the definition of that? It's in the legal documentation. It's in legal proceedings. It is taken
Yeah.
very, very serious. In the UK, they have non-crime hate incidents for which
And
you
the
can be
police show up
charged.
at your door. Like,
Yeah, but what is? Why don't we have? We don't have as far as I'm aware, there is no proper legal definition with boundaries of what it means, of what hate is, or what it is considered to
mm-hmm.
be.
Well, we're eroding language. The meaning of words is creeping into more.
Social constructionism.
Yeah, you got to worry about the people who say the world is socially constructed, because that's what they're doing, right? They're telegraphing that
Yeah.
they're basically gaslighting existence. So, in context, we have 265 of these reported hate incidents by this cohort in Canada in 2020. Now, something happened in 2020. I don't know if anyone remembers, but it kind of increased social anxiety a little bit, right? In 2021, there was 425 approximately hate motivated incidents reported to police across Canada. Police now have to, assess this in their reports. Like, was this person trans? Are they gay? Was it hate motivated? So we've got 423 reported incidents. We know that about 20% or a little more, 1 in 5-ish, are actually result in any kind of charges. So we have under 100 charges in Canada in 2021. I don't want to diminish this, because any hate motivated
Yeah.
crime is despicable, right?
Well, I'd like to point out though, if you are attacking someone with a knife, it is very likely that you hate them regardless. I cannot imagine that there are many violent crimes that are not hate crimes. I don't understand the distinction is what I'm trying to make.
Well,
it's not that crime is bad. It's not that hateful things are bad, but it's about identifying what they mean by this thing, because anything can be put in that category. Let's be honest. Violent crimes are terrible. That's not what we're supporting
yeah. Well,
here.
I mean, speaking of violent crimes, right? So we've got 100 charges. Who knows how many convictions out of those 100 charges? Out of 40 million people in 2021,
Yeah.
there were 38,000 assaults reported in 2021.
Yeah.
So contextually speaking, if we're talking about violence and hatred and the antisocial behavior happening in our society, for the Minister of Gender, Women and Gender Equity to stand up and say that there's a 64% increase, we're talking about an actual increase of charges from maybe 70 to maybe 90 in a single year.
Yeah.
It's just as egregious as these missing threads insinuating that people are dying. It's the manipulation of language, like you said earlier. This hysteria. Well, that wasn't your word. What was it? Everything is bigger and exaggerated than it really is. Hyperbole.
histrionics, perhaps that's what I'm seeing in all this. It's very histrionic, and I do mean that in a
Yeah,
clinical
I agree
sense.
with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, speaking of the histrionics, there is a CP24 article that I'll post up. Says Saskatchewan, New Brunswick naming changes mean life or death for trans. Right. So let me just read a little bit in this article, and this is common of the articles that I've read on this topic. The concern over the rights of children is shared by a prominent national civil liberties group, which believes the policies ought to be challenged. These policies, quote, these policies have discriminatory impact on trans and gender diverse students, says Harini Sivalagram, sorry about that, Director of Equality Programs at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Quote, for example, a cisgender student who wants to use a nickname doesn't need to speak or seek parental consent, but a trans student would be required to do so. So this clearly has a discriminatory effect that will cause harm to trans students. So I pulled this out for a couple of reasons, because one, again, these are people that we're supposed to trust and are either grossly misunderstanding the problem or manipulating you. One of the two. Which is it? Neither one are good.
Right.
But also here we're talking about comparing what we're asking, what parents are asking, with something very, very benign, and saying, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. It's like nicknames. This is nothing like nicknames. It's nothing like nicknames. This is the first step in a serious mental health intervention that leads to medical intervention that has serious lifelong consequences. It is nothing like me being called Mel.
Yeah. Or Tomb Raider.
Possibly not by choice.
Nicknames are a funny thing, right? We don't get to pick our nicknames. They get assigned to us by people. Yeah.
They do.
My friends used to call me Boosh. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's a very good point that I hadn't thought of. None of my nicknames I've chosen. That it's your friends give them these to you. But the difference with the trans is that you have to find this identity, and then you have to announce to everyone what this new identity and name is, and then you have to demand respect for it, which is entirely the opposite, if nothing else.
Yeah. Nicknames, I think, too, are they're most often terms of endearment. There is an underlying respect, especially, I mean, we've talked about men's roles and women's roles before. In guy circles, getting your nickname is sort of like, that's a badge of honor in lots of ways. And then some people don't like their nicknames, but, that's just, it's evolving language, and it's evolving relationship and trust and rapport. And it's very different from, announcing, like if someone, so,
well, would you threaten to commit suicide if your friends did not speak your nickname? So let me read a little bit more from this article to make that point. A landmark 2018 study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health found transgender youth who were able to use their preferred names, nicknames that we're comparing to, and pronouns reported a 34% drop in suicidal thoughts and a 65% decrease in suicide attempts. Last year, the Canadian Medical Association Journal concluded trans kids face a greater risk of suicide than their heterosexual peers. When in your life has you not being called Bushy? Was it Bushy?
Yeah, close.
O'Shea, whatever your nickname is, me not being called Tomb Raider would lead to me deciding that I needed to commit suicide.
I bring this up sometimes. My name is Shannon, and most people, especially if I'm communicating by email or if I'm talking with someone on the phone who's from the government or from a bank or a utility, they often don't think I'm me. Right? So I get misgendered all the time. I've been misgendered my whole life.
I love being misgendered. It's my favorite.
I don't see how you could be misgendered with the name Melanie.
I've been, with the whole queer activism stuff, I've had people sort of like, see, do you like it? And it's my favorite. I love it. I love it.
I joked sometimes that I now have a legitimate human rights complaint. And once or twice I've used that to my advantage when I'm interacting with an institution. Like, are you misgendering me?
But for you as well, like you have to understand, okay, yes, your name is Shannon, which is for many people a girl's name. Not for me because it's Irish,
Right.
but it's very common. But it's not like you wanted to commit suicide because people were making that mistake. It's just
Yeah.
life. Like when you're comfortable with yourself, when you have a good self-esteem, these things are they're not a problem. There's something that you play with that you can make fun of that actually in many respects can make you closer to
Yeah.
people, by joking about these things rather than getting upset and demanding to be gendered appropriately and having that kind of histrionic response, that sort of narcissistic
Yeah.
response.
I want to circle back to that study because that was the one that Marcy Len referenced. And
Yes.
like I said,
Which is a
right.
favorite.
I like numbers, and I like disambiguating things. We looked at the numbers about the so-called hate crimes. There were
Yeah.
less than 150 people, if I recall, 150 young people who were surveyed in that study. It was a qualitative survey, so very small sample size, a very limited.
Qualitative, let me just point out here, qualitative does not mean that it's not numerical.
Right.
It's surveys. It's
It's
asking people
what's the range of your
questions.
feelings on this issue?
We call this soft science, which is you always have to take with a pinch of salt. But in this case, it is treated like hard
Yeah.
science, where this is an absolute, which it is absolutely not. I just wanted to point that
Yeah.
out.
This whole argument about transitioning kids and changing pronouns and things and the suicide rate. So I'll go from memory a little bit. I ran some numbers on it, and there are about, as far as I can tell, 300,000 trans-identified youth in the United States, give or take. And this wasn't a thing 20 odd years ago. So if trans-identified people are the most historically marginalized and oppressed, and we're only just figuring out that changing their pronouns and putting them on hormones is going to save their lives, and 40.
Well, where's the sea of suicidal
Right,
premature
like
pregnancy?
if this actually worked, we would have solved
When gender roles were
a
actually
massive
enforced,
suicide problem
right?
in the
You would think that in the 1950s, they would be just an
yeah,
untold number of young people that would have committed suicide because of
corpses
gender roles
everywhere.
everywhere.
And you would think that the
Absolutely.
person or group of people who came up with the idea to give kids wrong sex hormones and change their pronouns and sex change them would get a Nobel Prize,
A Nobel
right?
Prize.
Because for
Yes,
saving so many
absolutely.
lives, this is just
Yeah. A
a
revolution in
problem that
humanity.
never existed before. But yet we have these hysterical arguments and histrionic arguments, and that is a clinical term,
Yes.
that this has to be done or else kids are going to kill themselves. It's a
Yeah.
it's a cult of safetyism. It's another one of those words, harm and safety, that are just made gross in proportions that have no connection to reality anymore. And trying to move policy to shield people from accountability, shield the school system from accountability, hide these transitions of kids at school, have the secrets about when this content is coming in, when the brainwashing starts, right? Like the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, they start classes on Tuesday, of course, like a lot of other kids in Canada. They put out a recommendation email to all their teachers of 72,000 students that the assumption is that unless you know a child's preferred pronoun, uh, the
Yeah.
recommendation is you address them as they, them. Okay.
What does that
Right.
say?
Well, it does a couple.
What does
Right. It
that
does a
say?
couple of things. Like a kindergarten student who comes in and the teacher is maybe an activist or really bought into this and is trying to teach the kids about pronouns, is teaching them gender ideology and queer theory, whether we want to call it that or not, that you could be born in the wrong.
As it were just
That's right. And
facts.
you get it. An
Just the facts.
authority figure. You have an institution of authority that's teaching this as facts. You have vulnerable and impressionable kids. I mean, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2.
Let me just underline here that children believe the adults
That's
in their
right.
lives because they're children. That's what they're designed to do. They believe. Adults question things because they have theory of mind. They can think for themselves. Well, I'd like to believe most of us adults can think for ourselves, and will want to discuss and figure out what the thing is. Why is this being pushed at such a young age? Is because they will just believe it. And if you get that in people's minds very
Yep.
young, And this is why many people have a lot of issues with even religious indoctrination, like hard religious indoctrination from a very young age, because people just believe
Mm-hmm.
it, or young people, very young people, just believe it. So this is a real issue.
Absolutely.
It's not just, oh, we'll just call them they to be kind and inclusive. No, this goes way beyond
Yeah.
that.
Well, that brings us to September 20th. We have less than 3 weeks to go, 2.5 weeks until Wednesday the 20th. Our Duty Canada put out an amazing video a couple of days, and one of the things that really struck me was the number. Our Duty put up the playbills, right? Like, here's the city, here's the time, here's the location,
And there's
and
more.
and
There's more
there,
now
I don't know
too.
how many there were. There was 25 or 30 or even more of these different events.
All the way to the
Yep.
Yukon White
Yeah.
Horse.
And we know that the organizer there has been talking with police, and they're actually going to like change all the lights green for them as they're marching down the street to the
Yeah.
government offices. And
Coast to coast to coast to port. That is
it
absolutely a
it's
thing right now. And it is growing every
it's really
day.
incredible. 2 years ago, just shy, I felt completely alone. I stood up in public. I started speaking out. I got attacked in the media, along with other people that we've talked about before: Billboard Chris, Chanel Fall, Megan Murphy, the outspoken voices in Canada. And I'm not in that class, by the way. Billboard Chris is a maverick. He really is an iconic figure. Um,
Yeah, he's doing a lot for us here
yeah,
in Canada. Yeah, very
same
grateful
with
for
Megan
that.
Murphy, who's been talking about women's rights in this issue for a number of years and the
Yeah.
erasure of women's rights. But now it's gone onto the public imagination, and it's the kids. And when the secret's out about the secrets, and people are realizing, because even though we're highly insulated in the media environment in Canada from the rest of the world, people are getting onto this, that maybe sex changing kids is not a good idea.
Well, there's been a lot of media coverage from the UK, which is fantastic because my friends and family in the UK, although sympathetic to the issues, really do feel that I'm exaggerating, because I don't think it's as prominent there. It does exist there, but it's not as prominent. And so there seems to be a lot of interest coming from the UK, especially about the Tranada
Yeah,
situation.
yeah. So a lot of if you're not involved already in some kind of action across the country, our first recommendation is that if you have children, that you keep them home from school. It's the simplest way to send a
Yeah.
message. It's a peaceful or passive resistance, civil disobedience kind of,
And use our
and
letters to announce
yeah,
your
and
intent.
we're sending a vote, we're sending a message by the absence to schools and school
Hmm.
boards about this. There are plans for using absences and absenting kids that we haven't talked about yet publicly, and I think that
Yeah.
depending how far this goes, could end up playing out. That have to do with school funding, because keeping kids out. I saw an article this morning, and it's just flashed by my eyes, but that more and more parents are deciding to homeschool, or they're getting involved in
Yeah.
learning pods because they just do not want to subject their kids to this kind of ideology. Um,
Well, when the government is saying all over the place that parents' rights is a dog whistle of Nazism or far right ideology, and that parents really have no rights, and you have teachers coming onto Twitter saying things like they absolutely do not respect parents, not with those words, but basically that's what they're saying. Why wouldn't you want to
yeah,
homeschool your children? If you are not respected, you are expected to raise a child, but you're not respected to be their moral guidance.
yeah,
Yeah, why wouldn't you want to
yeah.
homeschool?
I want to. I think we need to focus on this, and we're going to wrap this up in a second or two. But the conversation about parents' rights is a dog whistle, but it's not a dog whistle to the right. It's a dog whistle to the left. Okay, what I think that we're talking about really is parents' responsibility, because parents have a
Yes.
responsibility to make sure their children are safe and cared for and not
Yeah.
exposed to threats or potential threats or stressors that they don't need to be exposed to. Parents have a right, they, and they have an obligation.
Well, the responsibility is to raise healthy and happy adults that are productive members of society. That's the responsibility. But with every responsibility should come rights. And the rights are to say no when there are things that you feel would interfere with that responsibility. And we don't often talk about responsibilities. People scream and shout all the time about rights, having rights, demanding rights. But we need to talk more about the responsibilities associated with those rights. It's a two-sided coin.
Yeah. I hope that we can shift that narrative in our communications just a little bit around this issue, because yes, parents' rights. We have a right to raise our children. Children have a right to be raised within the culture and the cultural framework and the families that they were born to. That's in the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child. And the state doesn't have the right to interfere with that. In fact, it's condemned because, there are no circumstances that I can think of where the state has proven itself to be a good parent anywhere in the world.
Well, biologically speaking, if you just look at genetics, it's the closest kin that is the most protective.
And we have the most.
Species,
we have the most invested. Yeah, we have the most invested.
And if it's your child, you share half of that DNA. It is basically half of you. A teacher, a school board, the government, they share very little to none, depending on the size of the country. And so even on a genetic basis, if you're talking about science, it makes no sense that the government is a better carer for any child than yourself. That does not undermine the fact that there are abusive parents out there, and that is something that needs to be addressed. But on the whole, for the vast majority, it is not the government that's going to be or any teacher for that matter, that's going to be a better carer and more responsible in raising a child than yourself. It just isn't.
Yeah. Well, we expect a lot of developments in the coming week.
I want to bring something up at the end for fun. Because this week we had, I found quite amusing, Kayla Lemieux, who was the large-breasted male
Booby
teacher.
McGee.
Booby McGee has come back to teaching, only this time in a completely different school. What I found very interesting is Lemieux showed up at school without the gigantomastia condition. It was no longer there. And I did wonder whether or not he's had a gender-affirming double mastectomy, because those breasts seem to have,
Interesting. I wondered if he detransitioned, if it's fair now that he's had it.
Well, he did say that it was a medical condition. He said that this was natural, that he had a condition called gigantomastia, and that it wasn't his fault, and it just, and so that's what I'm saying, that they've disappeared. And so I say congratulations to Kayla for being brave and getting your double mastectomy.
It's, we've, like you've wondered a bunch, like, are they lying or are they just misinformed? In a situation like this, there's been a lot of conversation since it started a year ago. Is this guy having us on, or is he really, transgender? And can't tell. I find it fascinating. I heard when he was going to the Hamilton region, I knew that there was going to be an uproar because there's a lot of, well-organized parents and good mailing lists there. And he, in Durham region, was it Durham region? Halton region. He took so much heat.
Halton.
Hundreds of parents, if not thousands, in a parents group had organized to confront the school board. And, we know that the Hamilton board has some really woke administrators there. One of them who was involved with the tragedy of Richard Bilkstow, that they would protect him if he was going to play that game. But now it seems, at least until school starts, he's dressed in his civvies without the extra.
And I just want to say, Kayla, if you're listening, honestly, you're much better looking as a guy or presenting male. Yeah, you're not bad looking. I mean, you just keep it up.
Awesome. Well, that's the Weekly Canadian Gender Wars report for this week. I'm engaged in something else next weekend, and we're going to see if we can find someone to join Melanie in a conversation for next week's Weekly Canadian Gender Wars report. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks as regular. Make sure you like and subscribe or sign up to the Substack where we're publishing this. Share the video with people. I think we've got some good clips that we're going to be able to put up on social media as well. Thanks for the conversation, Melanie. As always, enjoyable, and I hope you have a terrific day.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Have a great weekend.